Hello, this is Joey's thoughts on, well, Ghostbusters reboot. And since there's all sorts of videos on the internet about people's opinions of things on it, I'll make Joey's thoughts on the Ghostbusters reboot. And of course, I'm talking the third person there for a second, just to state the title. To get away from that now, just to start saying what I think of it. I'm kind of interested in Ghostbusters 3, kind of apathetic. Not so much because I didn't think it would be good. I was fairly sure there'd be a good chance it would be a very good movie, considering the writing of the first movie. The second movie I do consider to be a good movie. It often gets picked on, but let's face it, it was living up to the first movie. It kind of recycled the highs and lows of the first movie, but doing so in a less iconic, really just a less interesting movie. But it was still a good movie. Set it up next to a random group of other fairly good movies, and it stands up well. Set it next to the original Ghostbusters, and it's like, I'd rather rewatch the first Ghostbusters. And I kind of understand that, but for the most part, I liked it, thought it was a good sequel. It even made some small effort to acknowledge the animated series, while being kind of a bit of a paradox, making it look like the animated series might not have happened, but so there could have been a little bit editing there on whether or not they were acknowledging the real Ghostbusters, which to me, Ghostbusters was the greatest things that happened to Ghostbusters after the first movie was the syndicated season of the animated series, The Real Ghostbusters, and Extreme Ghostbusters. Extreme Ghostbusters takes a lot of crap for people who just wanted to see the original Ghostbusters over again. It even takes crap for its title. Extreme Ghostbusters was a silly name. But then again, the previous animated series was called The Real Ghostbusters. And, well, we all know why, the story of Filmation and that. Well, maybe not everybody, but I won't get into that too much. But the previous series was called The Real Ghostbusters. Compared to that, Extreme Ghostbusters was actually a pretty good title, only compared to that. And when you get also right down to it, there was some in-story reasons for calling them Extreme Ghostbusters. One of the characters, Garrett, was into extreme sports, and while those might not be an interest of mine, he referred to the new team as Extreme Ghostbusters a couple times, referring to the old team as the original Ghostbusters. So, I mean, there was kind of a reason for giving it that title. But I'm not going to dwell on that. The story quality of Extreme Ghostbusters was actually pretty high and consistent. I could definitely find some nitpicks, things to nit with it, some nits to pick out of it, but it wasn't that bad compared to most, be it serious science fiction or animated shows out there. The nits to pick were not that bad. It was and it was a well-written show, as was the syndicated season of The Real Ghostbusters. Some of the network seasons, some of the network episodes were great too, but for the most part, to me, one movie alone wasn't enough to make a franchise, to make this fictional universe that was worth imagining, worth paying attention to the stories and enjoying. Like, what makes these science fiction and fantasy franchises great is the fact that there are really good stories, like Ghostbusters the movie and Ghostbusters the video game, and many in-between stories too that are really good. And as long as if at worst it's just kind of okay, then you're doing pretty impressive. So to me, Ghostbusters was made great by having an animated series. So I would be more interested in a sequel to Extreme Ghostbusters than actually focusing on movies. So I'm kind of neutral to the whole idea of a third Ghostbusters movie. I want more Ghostbusters. I loved the comic book series by Now Comics. Volume 1 was great. Volume 2 was kind of... it was worth reading if you're a Ghostbusters fan, but Volume 1 was full of, science fiction-y goodness with a supernatural twist. Volume 1 of The Real Ghostbusters, published by Now Comics, now reprinted by IDW. Kind of a reboot. 88 miles per hour Studios did a Ghostbusters reboot of sorts that was actually really good. It was actually amazing. I wasn't too impressed with the IDW reboot, but there were some moments that were really great. For example, Displaced Aggression was actually a really, really good graphic novel, and the individual comics that made it up were excellent. And I also liked when they did their Infestation crossover. The Ghostbuster story in it was one of the best stories they had done in Infestation. And it was actually a really good Ghostbuster story. But for the most part, I don't get too excited about the idea of a new movie. I actually did lose a fair bit of respect for Bill Murray, because it seemed like he was blocking the movie. Not just that he didn't want to be in it, but there was kind of an attitude that he was actively blocking it from being made. And his general attitude towards sequels didn't really impress me. So I lost a bit of respect for Bill Murray. Which is fine. He's just an actor. I don't know him personally. Who cares? Yeah, so I was kind of apathetic, but it was something to look forward to. Really, Ghostbusters, the video game, was the third sequel. And it was good. It was probably even better than the first movie. But kind of, that would mean Ghostbusters 3 would be kind of like the fourth sequel. But a franchise like that really should have more. Star Trek. To me, Star Trek, the original series was good. I liked Next Generation more. But if they hadn't made the Next Generation, as great as Star Trek was, I think the Next Generation made it the great thing that Star Trek became. Now, not to belittle how good and optimistic Star Trek was to begin with, but Next Generation took it and said, hey, we created this fictional universe. We can do more stories in it. Doesn't have to be all these same characters. Yeah, it's kind of important to some of us writers to do more stories with those characters, but we also created a fictional universe here. Let's expand it. And you got Next Generation. And to me, Next Generation is what made Star Trek a great science fiction, I guess for lack of a better word, franchise. I don't really like to use the word franchise, but made the Star Trek universe the great storytelling universe that it is. Because it expanded it. It wasn't all going to be Kirk and his Enterprise or his new Enterprise. It would be more stuff. And while I really liked Star Trek The Next Generation, even that wasn't my favorite. Enterprise became my favorite. But it started the whole idea. It's like, we have this universe here, this fictional universe we created. Here's something else going on over there. Extreme Ghostbusters was actually something I would kind of look forward to, a Ghostbusters The Next Generation. So I wasn't too disappointed, because I already had the original Ghostbusters in many, many different stories. Many episodes of The Real Ghostbusters, those first two movies. So I kind of like the idea of a Ghostbusters The Next Generation. Now, Ghostbusters 3 apparently once again has gotten cancelled, which is kind of disappointing. I believe the death of Harold Ramis may have had something to do with it. And actually I find that kind of hard to understand. If you had just died and something you were working on was going to be cancelled because you weren't around anymore, wouldn't that be kind of a weird thought? I mean, you're dead, so you're not going to be thinking about it. But I mean, if you were working on something and with other people, and you suddenly realized you were dying, you'd probably have bigger concerns than just working on some little movie. You want to live. But that said, it's kind of like, wouldn't the show go on, and wouldn't you kind of want it to? I figured that it was an obstacle and something unfortunate, but I didn't figure it would bring it to a stop, and there were some reports that they were still going to make Ghostbusters 3 despite that fact. Which I thought, good. I mean, it's unfortunate Harold Ramis wasn't there. If they really wanted to bring back the character Egon, maybe they could find to make him a disembodied mind in a computer and have Marcel Lamar, is that how you pronounce his name? The guy who did Egon's voice in the cartoon, who did an awesome Egon, by the way, could actually take over the role. I mean, you could find, it's Ghostbusters, you could find all kinds of ways to keep that character around if you wanted, or just write him off, or just have it focus on perhaps Raymond Stantz and Winston Zeddemore. But as the senior Ghostbusters, and bring in the new generation of Ghostbusters they're thinking about doing, which was fine. But now they're apparently going to totally restart the new movie Ghostbusters idea. And it's going to be a reboot. And reboots, you know, they don't really impress me. Expansions on an existing universe does. To me, a reboot only serves a purpose if the previous movies have gone so crappy that you can't salvage it. If eventually, for example, Godzilla, let's just say Godzilla eventually started making a series of really horrible, crappy movies, then I could understand them wanting to start over and say, you know, this was crazy, this was crap. But I believe that what the Godzilla movies sometimes do now, and I believe it varies from example to example, I haven't followed Godzilla that closely, is they might ignore some movies, might decanonize them, but for the most part, try to reference some of the previous ones. That's one way to go about it. You can't really call Transformers a reboot because it's just a new incarnation when they did the live-action movies. There was the Star Trek reboot, which was, again, not a real reboot. They tried to give respect to the existing series by using time travel to create an alternate reality, and while I thought that Star Trek movie of 2009 was horribly stupid, I loved the idea of splitting the timeline and going off in a different direction. That idea I loved. There was so much about that movie that annoyed the hell out of me. It was just another crappy movie, big blockbuster movie that was stupid. I mean, Avengers, big blockbuster movie, that's awesome. Star Trek, painfully stupid and unpleasant. As was Transformers 2, which gets a lot of flack for being painfully stupid. I actually got a headache trying to watch the second live-action Transformers movie. I actually just wanted to see the scenes with the Chevrolet Volt in it. I like those cars. But, yeah, so this whole idea of rebooting the series and starting over doesn't incredibly impress me. All-female cast? Not a bad idea. Ghostbusters Next Generation with all-female new Ghostbusters? To me, that would be a great idea. Maybe have Dan Aykroyd set them up with a new franchise. You could have a female equivalent of Egon, a female wise-ass like Venkman, you know, or entirely new dynamic, whatever, you know. But a complete reboot? Why? I mean, really, why? It doesn't make sense to me. They could play around with that universe. The idea of creating a new Ghostbusters franchise, or even the same old firehouse with a new generation of Ghostbusters, that would be so easy. The idea of a reboot just doesn't interest me whatsoever. And I really don't know what to say about that, other than just how strange it seems to me to unnecessarily reboot something. Like I said, a reboot makes sense if the previous stuff had gone somewhere so far out of whack you can't expand on it anymore. But it's something that's already done. So why reboot Ghostbusters? And if you wanted to start over fresh with a female cast, I'm fine with that. The first Ghostbusters group was an all-male cast. They had Janine Melnitz, but she was just the secretary. An all-female cast works for me as well as an all-male cast. Makes about as much sense. I mean, you could give some statistical reasons why it might be a little less likely in the way the world works culturally. But, no, I think a female cast, that sounds fine to me. Reboot? It's like, there's absolutely no reason to reboot it. And really, I guess that's about all there is to say about it. Star Trek, they wanted to do a whole new thing with the original series, uh, so they rebooted it. Personally, I thought those movies were painfully stupid. There's other reboots out there that I can't think of. They're talking about doing a Babylon 5 reboot, which to me is kind of really disappointing, but because Babylon 5 was awesome. But yeah, so basically, hopefully it'll be a good movie. I can't understand why they would reboot it. And maybe the popularity of this movie will get them to make an animated series. And maybe rather than making an animated series on the new movie, maybe they'll make a sequel to the existing animated series. Because it had its low points. It had some really low quality network episodes. But it was basically full of awesome stories and an awesomely created fictional universe. It was basically a sci-fi universe with a supernatural twist. Sure, they weren't aliens, but they were extra-dimensional beings that happened to be often the leftover mind or emotions of human beings, somehow echoing in that netherworld, somehow working their way back into reality as ectoplasmic form. It wasn't just another stupid ghost story. They actually tried to work some concepts of realism into it. They tried to make things have causality. There was physics to it. It wasn't just that it's a ghost, it's scared by holy water, or some magical incantation. They actually tried to make a pretty decent world with Ghostbusters, a fictional reality. It had its own technobabble, which, while being babble to the real world, it aimed for a certain level of realism. So it's, to me, one of the most impressive fictional series ever. If series is fictional series, I guess plural, but I guess that's how you'd say series plural. That's a great fictional series. It deserves respect. It deserves to be continued in some form. But to me, a reboot is not a continuation. A reboot is it's a reboot. It's something else. It's something else with the same name. And to me, that's kind of disappointing. But it could be great. It could gain Ghostbusters a little bit of popularity, but then again, Ghostbusters' popularity never faded away. It might get people hyped up. When they brought back Star Trek, apparently all the ads for it, even if they didn't look like Star Trek ads, they looked like Mountain Dew commercials on crack, apparently was quite helpful to the sale of Star Trek comic books. Though I noticed that after the new Star Trek movie had come out, then, I don't know, the novel sales seemed to go away. Like, bookstores were no longer carrying the novels. I suppose it might have been that Star Trek had suddenly been less appealing to people who could read, and considering how painful the movie was, I could kind of picture needing to turn off one's intelligence to enjoy the last two Star Trek movies. But yeah, things change. Ghostbusters reboot to me doesn't sound like that great of a thing. It sounds like something for me to say could be good, but they might as well have come up with an entirely different title than Ghostbusters, as far as I'm concerned. If it's a reboot, it's just something else. It's not a continuation or an expansion of the ideas that were already created and worked out, fleshed out, and presented in what's already known as Ghostbusters. So, reboot could be good. If it's, maybe they will make it a legitimate sequel, Ghostbusters The Next Generation with an all-female cast. That's not what they're saying they're going to do. So, as of this time, I'm just going to say, it doesn't really interest me, despite the fact I've been a big Ghostbusters fan ever since the 1980s. And hopefully it will actually be something good. But at the moment, I don't have a whole lot of reason to get interested. But it is Ghostbusters, so I am kind of interested, and I'm going to be curious. It's just not showing a lot of potential for me to be anything more than curious but apathetic.